Mic check. Mic check. Okay. How's this? Music good? Quick mic check, music check, and alright, bet. Alright, so I've got a little cough. Excuse my voice for this episode. I'm just getting over a little bug. But we're gonna jump straight into it. We got episode 3. Now, what is the Bible? That's the title we're running with. And the purpose here is not to go through the Bible. I'm not teaching the Bible. I'm not going to be saying, oh, first you have Moses and then Aaron. And so that's not the purpose here. We're looking at it historically. What is this? What is it? How did we get this? And why does it matter? Because as we develop this series, it's going to be important that we give an account for what we're even talking about, what the Bible even is, because most people, especially in the West, don't even know. So we're just going to, there's a lot we could go. I had to actually cut a lot of content for this one to just keep it within a good time range. But yeah, get comfy. We're about to jump straight into it and just make sure sound quality's all good, everything's up. Let me see. You guys can hear me okay? Yeah, okay. All right. So, refresher. Actually, let me get this music down. Second. Yeah, that's better. All right. So, real quick, just a quick little recap. We've been doing this for the last 2 episodes, but I want to hammer this in because this is, again, the key triad of approaching outside the English language, which is a necessary thing to do when you're trying to do any type of history or inquire into any subject really spanning outside of Britain, America in the last couple centuries. So, cataclysmos, the Greek word, we would transliterate cataclysmos, and then in the anglicized form, we have cataclysm, which is a word we use regularly and often in English. Same thing with catastrophe. And as you see, the translation is what it means to transliteration, anglicization, as we've covered. So proper names are a lot more common and noticeable. So we've got a few here. Sophia, it translates, this just means wisdom. And when you transliterate it, it's actually faithfully kept in our English dialect today, Sophia. Then you have another example here, Selene, which translates to the moon. And then transliterates Selene. Again, it's preserved, kept pretty faithfully in the Latin alphabet. A couple more names, and these kind of get more complex here. Ioannis or Joannis. It's going to be the transliterated form of the Greek, and then it just means God is gracious. And commonly in English, we have the name John from here. Then we get to the next one, Andreas. This means strong, courageous, or noble, specifically in the masculine tense. Transliteration, you get Andreas, like if you've ever heard of San Andreas. This is just Andrew, anglicizes in the way we now in English say it, Andrew. So Andreas, Andrew, these are the same thing. And then we've covered this one specifically already, so this is going to kind of kick off the topic for this episode, Biblos. This just means book or scroll, and transliterates Biblos, and this is where we get the word in English, Bible. So Bible, again, just means the book. So looking at the Bible, we want to know its history, its historia. And as we covered in episode 2, this really means an investigation or an inquiry. What is going to be found from investigating what the Bible is? So we already established that modern Hebrew is both a modern fabrication, both modern and a fabrication. So what then are all these books' origins? Because we're so used to hearing Hebrew Bible, right? What are these books? How many? Who or what determines this? And why do the answers to these questions matter? And what are their implications? So overall, what we're really asking is how do we furnish an
Rottenolberg
epistemological
just tipped
foundation
$1.
to approach
My
this?
sprinkler goes like this, ES. ES, CS, 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 T, 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 T.
It begins. Thank you, Mr. Nolberg. So, the word itself, epistemology, was coined into English by, and you'll notice I use the diphthong here. Anglish or English could really be said either way. That's why we have the word Anglicization with the A rather than the E, because it's a diphthong vowel. It's A and E together. Archaically, the way English used to be said and written. But anyway, episteme, and logos. This is where we get epistemologia or epistemologia or epistemology. And it's basically how do we give an account for what we know? How do we know what we know? That's basically philosophy 101 for defining that. But first and foremost, if you notice in that last picture, the guy who coined the word is practicing the hidden hand, right? So that's something that is a pattern, a trend. You're going to see it over and over again. People who bring in and coin these words that are shaping and manipulating the way we speak, read, and write in English, many oftentimes are Freemasons or connected with this Freemasonic network. Freemasonry is born out of Great Britain, out of England, and America. This really is the ethos or the spirit that is the cultural foundation for Anglodom, you could say, the English-speaking world. Now, we're going to just outright say it fully on. Freemasonry is a sect of Kabbalistic Judaism. That's it. Put very plainly and simply. And you'll notice with Kabbalah or Kabbalah, it's the root is Cabal. Okay, so think about when Alex Jones or you hear these types get on and they're like, oh, there's a cabal, the cabal is up to something. That's referencing Kabbalah. So Kabbalah or Kabbalah is mystical Judaism. It's mystical and more magic-centered traditions within the religion of Judaism. And don't just take it from me. Let's look at some examples from Freemasons and from Jewry themselves, where they will both affirm this and tell us, you don't have to take it from me. Here's a quote right here. Each Masonic lodge is and must be a symbol of the Jewish temple. Each master in the chair a representative of the Jewish king, and every Mason acting as a personation of the Jewish workman. And this is from an encyclopedia of Freemasonry and its kindred sciences, 1873, by the 33 Mason Albert G. Mackey. And it doesn't end here. We have more. Excuse me, I had to cough. So we have more here still. It doesn't just end with Mr. Mackey. So here's Rabbi Isaac Mayer Wise. He says, we know still more that Masonry is a Jewish institution whose history, degrees,
33
charges,
degree Trump just tipped $1. Oyeve, the Greek Bible is anti-Semitic. If you do not agree with the true Bible of the Jews, the KJV and the Tanakh, you are an anti-Semitic goy.
That is something Trump would probably say. Thank you. Good one. Good one. Anyway, continuing. We know still more that Masonry is a Jewish institution whose history, degrees, charges, passwords, and explanations are Jewish from beginning to end. It is impossible to be well posted in Masonry without having a Jewish teacher. And that is a quote from Rabbi Isaac Mayer Wise in America. And then here, a Jewish source affirming the same thing. It has been universally admitted by the order that to part Masonry and Judaism is impossible. In fact, to use a well known axiom among us, Judaism is Masonry and Masonry is Judaism. And this is the Jewish Chronicle in 1867. And then here's a pretty big bomb for Freemasonry right here. The technical language, symbolism, and rites of European Freemasonry are full of Jewish ideas and Jewish terms. In the Scottish Rite, the dates on official documents are given according to the year and months of the Jewish calendar, and use is made of the modern Hebraic alphabet. Now, this is from 1903, the Jewish Encyclopedia, Volume 5. And to call back to last episode, we went over exactly just what the modern Hebraic alphabet is. It's highlighted in red in that bottom left image. So this is Freemasonry. This is, out in the open. So anyway, moving on, we're not trying to go off in a rabbit hole about Freemasonry. We know that the Bible, and specifically the Old Testament, comes to us from Greek, and the Greek comes from ancient Hebrew. We covered this in episode 2, but let's look at some of the contemporaries going back into antiquity. They affirm this. They say this themselves. So here we have a quote from Philo of Alexandria. This is a Pharisee, a rabbi in the 1st century AD. He says, in every case, exactly corresponding Greek words were employed to literally translate the corresponding Chaldaic words, being adapted with utmost perfection to the things which were to be enumerated. Now, notice there's two notable things here. One is the fact that Hebraic in ancient times is actually interchangeable with the title or the name Chaldaic or Chaldaic. Now, that's an interesting rabbit hole that we might get into later at another time. But basically, what we've covered and what we see being mirrored here with Philo of Alexandria is the inversal or flippening from the ancient Hebrew, which is read and written from right to left, the Phoenician being right to left, and then Greek in its ancient proto forms coming left to right, being written and read left to right. So here's another quote from around the same era. We have Flavius Josephus or Josephus. Now, when the law had been copied and the work of translation came to an end after 72 days, Demetrios assembled all the Judeans at the same location where the laws had been rendered, and in the presence of the translators, read them aloud. Thereupon, all the people expressed their approval of the elders who interpreted the law, as well as praised Demetrios. And they urged that since the translation was so excellently completed, that it should not be altered. Sounds good, right? Sounds all cool. But you might say, oh, well, why do I care what Pharisees are saying about their Old Testament? Why do I care what these Jewish rabbis think? Why should I believe them, right? Well, let's look at these books for themselves, because it's not like the Greek has gone anywhere, the Greek Old Testament, or the Old Testament in general. We still have them and we can look at them ourselves. So what are some of the names of these books in and of themselves? Well, the first book in opening the Old Testament is Genesis. So now we return to our triadic bridge of going to Greek language. Wouldn't you know, the names of these books you're going to see are all in the Greek language, and we're pronouncing them in the Greek language. So Genesis, or Genesis, this is where genetics, the word, comes from in English, genealogy, so on and so forth, genes. From this Greek word, from this Greek base, Genesis, which just means origination, beginning, creation, or birth. Next up, we have Exodus, which just means to journey or venture out from, to leave, to depart from. And then we Latinize it from the Greek so that OS, Greek suffix, becomes US in the Latinization. So that's where we get Exodus. And then next you have Luidicon, which is just relating to or of the Luites or the Levites, because there's no V in Greek, so bear that in mind when you see and come across V. It's actually a U in its prior form, ancient form. This is where we get Leviticus. And then arithmoi, which just means numbers. And this is where we get the book of Numbers. arithmoi, the Greek word, is where we get arithmetic, and so on and so forth. So then Deuteronomion, or Deuteronomion, it's a compound Greek word of deutero and nomos. So second or repeated or regurgitated law, nomos being law, deuteros being second or repeated. And these are your 5 books of Moses. Notice all the names of them are in Greek. And that, of course, if you infer, is because that is the earliest preserved form of them we possess. So now we compare with the modern Hebrew renderings of them. You have the Pentateuchos versus Torah or Torah. Pentateuchos meaning the 5 vessels or the 5 vehicles. Torah in modern Hebrew today now meaning teaching or just instruction. And then, of course, you see Pentateuchos just becomes Pentateuch, which is probably a more familiar word. So what happened after we go from Philo of Alexandria to then Josephus, now we end up after the incarnation, after the 1st century AD, what begins happening? All these rabbis that we just looked at are praising and talking about how great their Greek Old Testament is. All of a sudden now Christianity is coming full
Christopher
circle.
Boone just tipped Ollie Lar. Hey man, can you start over? Just got here. Ha ha. Meow, 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 meow.
Thank you, but no, we cannot start over. But I'm glad you're here. So you fast forward about 80 years or so, and what do we find? Well, this is St. Justin Martyr. He says the Judean teachers reject the interpretation of the Septuagint, this being the same Greek Septuagint that we just saw being talked about by Philo and Josephus. And he says, from which they have taken away many passages. But he doesn't stop there.
Hammond
He says
Kinnigan
more.
PC just tipped $1. Nygar, how the fool CK is supposed to be seeing you monitor and sheet take them shades off.
Okay. But we're going to look at the full-on quote here. He says, but I'm far from putting any reliance on your teachers who refuse to admit the interpretation of the 70 elders who were with Ptolemaeus of the Egyptians is the true one. And now they attempt to reframe another. And I wish you to observe that they have taken away many scriptures from the translations performed by those 70 elders. So when you look this up or try to look into this, you just go to your generic wiki pages. And we just looked at these quotes of St. Justin Martyr, and you'll notice the flippening of the narrative that occurs right when you get to Wikipedia. So it says, this is the same work we were just quoting from. Here on Wikipedia it reads, the central claim is that the Hebrew scriptures properly belong to Christians who alone apprehend their true meaning. But we just read, and what we just saw was he's saying the Greek scriptures belong to the Christians who alone apprehend their true meaning. And not only that, he says the Judean sect, the Jews, are now reframing a new Old Testament canon or version. That's what he says, but here on Wiki it says his central claim is that the Hebrew Bible belongs to Christianity. So this is a lie, and this is misrepresenting what he says. And then if you click the blue hyperlink of Hebrew Scriptures, brings you to the Hebrew Bible, or the Tanakh. And then, of course, it's going to give you, the whole rabbinical breakdown of it. The Mikra, the Ketuvim, the Nevi'im, all this stuff that is entirely absent from the Bible canon St. Justin Martyr, A, is talking about, or B, even knows about. So again, you see this sleight of hand in the mainstream narrative just about everywhere you look, but here is a glaring example of it today being retrojected onto what these guys way back then were saying. So what is the development of the Hebrew Bible? We've talked a lot about the Greek. What about what we call the Hebrew Bible? Well, it's actually worse than you think. So the Masoretes We get to the Masoretes. And they tell us that these guys were a group of Talmudic rabbinical scholars who worked through the 5th through 10th centuries AD. So apparently there's this order of scholars that for 500 years through and through worked to make the Hebrew Bible.
Ben Shapiro, one Jew, just tipped $1. The Hebrew Bible is the Christian Bible. That is why we use the word Judeo-Christian. Stop it with the anti-Semitism. We are going to close your banks.
All right, I'm sorry, Ben. I'm sorry, Ben. I'm sorry, Mr. Shapiro. I'm sorry. Anyway. Oh, thank you. Anyway. Apparently 500 years they spend, and what is it they're doing? Well, they're masters of tradition, and we see that they're the ones bringing forward the quote-unquote Hebrew canon. So AD 1000s is when they're saying where they're placing in chronology the Hebrew Bible. And that this Masoretic text, it's called, is the Western world's basis for the entirety of the Old Testament today, particularly in the West and not in the East, which is something we'll get into in a little bit. But the Old Testament translation of almost every modern English version of the Bible is based on the Hebrew Bible. But the form of scripture used by the New Testament authors in early church was the Septuagint. Some continue to explain the radical divergences between the Septuagint and Hebrew Bible as evidence that the Greek translators used non-standard or non-canonical forms of the Hebrew, even though we know a canonical Hebrew Bible did not exist until several centuries after the Septuagint was translated. And this is a modern biblical scholar at Oxford, Timothy Michael Law, that we're quoting here. And it goes on. He gives you a good bit in this book. He's very soft, very mainstream, normie with it, but pay attention to what he says here. The ability to read Hebrew correctly might have posed challenges to some, and by the 7th or 8th century, they might have needed help to read the Hebrew text. One can imagine the difficulty of reading without vowels and the different interpretations that could arise from such a text. As in the following sentence of consonants, note the increasingly ridiculous different possibilities that follow it. So what we're finding out here is these Masoretes in the AD 1000s apparently took a bunch of manuscripts that were quote unquote their Babylonian, their Judaic Babylonian, or quote unquote Aramaic Babylonian Hebrew manuscripts that apparently had no vowels and no grammar structure. So what that means is it's illegible. It's not readable. There's nothing there to work with. And he gives you an example of exactly that right here using English. Imagine you open a book and it says JN space RN space T space TH STRT by BRD. And then you're told, oh, this guy, he calls himself a tradition master, a Masorete, says, oh, I know exactly what that means. I'm going to interpret that now. And it's like AD 1000 or 1100. Well, look at all the ways we can play with vowels and play with diacritics, grammar, punctuation points, and different points in written language. Look how much we can say. And this is just an example. It's much more than this. John ran to the store to buy bread. John, run to the store to buy bread. John ran to the store to buy a board. John ran to the stair at a bay board. Or, Jane, I run to thee, a star to obey, a bride. All of these can be made with the consonantal skeleton we're given at the beginning. So you see how it is entirely what would be in Latin called ipsi dixit, on the basis of, oh, he said so, because he said so. The Masorete said so. The rabbi tells me so. That's the transmission line where the West inherits this Hebrew Bible from, this Old Testament from. So there's a notable and remarkable difference between the historical development and preservation of the Bible in the Western and Eastern world. So in the East, and for the East, you have these councils that span over the entire first millennium, really, nearly all of it. And the West is a part of these, but of course, the East controlled the orb of the
Benny Gore
world.
just tipped $1. Bagels, bagels. Bagels, 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 meow, 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 meow.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh, where was I? Okay, yeah. So the councils of the first millennium basically give you the canon of the Greek Bible in the East. The West is just a part of these and affirms these. But what interestingly happens, and look how late the date is, the Council of Trent, they're going to reject the Greek Bible. The Catholic Church, the Latin Church, is going to reject the Septuagint in the year AD 1563 at what's called the Council of Trent. And this was convened by, he's called Pope Paul III. So what's the Pope? Well, this word comes from Greek papas. So literally, Pope means your father. So if you're a Catholic, your Pope is your father or your daddy, your dad, or papa. And it's the Anglicization form where we get from papas or papas, Pope. That's the line of transmission of this word, this title. So the Pope is your papa or your daddy, or, and many people don't know this, your God. So I've got two sources
Ranked one
here.
wall kisser just tipped $1. Him stroking my shit, watching this RN Melania one Sukak Mushi. Woof, 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 better woof, 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 woof.
Thank you. Thank you. What's interesting about this, and I've got two sources here for anyone who wants to look this up, and if you're Catholic watching this, you might want to pay attention to this. What we have is historically verifiable in the 16th century into the 17th century. The Pope or Daddy Papa wasn't just the Papa or Daddy figure, he was actually called God. The Pope used to be called God in Roman Catholicism in the Latin West. So here's the quote. It's preserved in these two sources I have above. And this is exactly what it says. But to believe that the Lord our God, the Pope, the founder of the decretal decree, and that he could not have decreed as he decreed, would be considered a heretic. Now, this is not that hard to look into or research if you are Catholic watching this and you want to learn more. Just go and look up Unum Sanctum, and you will find a lot about this. But yes, this is a historical reality. The Pope was called God for quite some time in the West. So one basic fact to understand between how Christendom in the East versus the West worked was you had bishops who governed different regions throughout the world. So you had, for example, the Bishop of Constantinople, the Bishop of Jerusalem, Bishop of Antioch, so on and so forth. And these would be the cleric or church leaders for that area, the tri-state area, this region. And every region had a bishop. Well, the Bishop of Rome is understood and historically, and today still in the East, recognized as just that, the Bishop of Rome. But in today in the West, the Bishop of Rome is called the Pope. And the Latin doctrine is that all bishops for all regions of the world now must function and behave in subservience and submission to the Bishop of Rome. Whereas in the East, all the bishops share equal power amongst each other. So that's really the big hierarchical difference between East and Western church authority, put simply. Now, and I don't understand how more people haven't brought this up or talked about this, but the father of the West, as St. Augustine is called, over and over again affirmed and said the Bible's Greek and used the Greek Bible. You want to translate the Bible into Latin? Translate the Greek into Latin. And we're going to look at a few quotes here because he, as quote unquote father of the West, is going to be betrayed at the Council of Trent. They're going to do the opposite of what St. Augustine says to do in his writings that he leaves behind. So here he says, among the actual translations, the Itala should be preferred above all others. This is also called the Vetus Latina today as well, as it keeps more closely to the words without sacrificing clarity of expression. To correct any Latin manuscripts, Greek ones ought to be used, and among these, as far as the Old Testament is concerned, the authority of the Septuagint is supreme. And this is from On Christian Doctrine, Book 2. That's not all he says. You have many other places of him affirming this. He says in Speculum, those books should not be omitted which are agreed to have been written before the advent of the Savior, because even though they are not accepted by the Judeans, yet the church of that same Savior accepted them. And of course, he's talking about the early church and primarily the Eastern Church. And then here in his magnum opus, you would call it, his chief work, City of God, he says, we are right in believing that the translators of the Septuagint had received the spirit of prophecy, and so if, with its authority, they altered anything and used expressions in their translation different from those of the original, we should not doubt that these expressions also were divinely inspired. So he's very adamant, and there's no wiggle room here when it comes to St. Augustine. He's very much pro and shilling the Greek Bible. Yet the Catholic Church today rejects the Greek Bible. It's a very curious thing. These are some interesting artworks here. It's hard to even know where to begin, but I'm definitely an old art appreciator. And here we have the conversation with St. Augustine. And that's St. Augustine with his head in his hands. Next to him would I believe, St. Ambrose of Milan. And this is when they're in Italy. And now this one's trippy. This is Consecration of St. Augustine. And very Egyptian elements in this artwork. Extreme, like the gems, the jewels in the hands. It's beautiful artwork though. But yeah, just that one's a lot to take in for sure. So I want to give it to some feedback, let the chat and comments kind of tell me where they would like to see us go next. So basically, we have these bullet point list of options. We can continue going through, building on this and getting into the Protestant Reformation, the Latin Church, the popes, and the Renaissance or rebirth. We can shift and pivot more to the East and go into the Eastern histories. We've got Darwin's dinosaurs, totally a pivot away from what we're doing right now. The 20th century, so that would be the 1900s, your world wars, Bolshevism, communism, etc. And this last one might end up being its own entire season itself, but the nefarious ones we call our English translators. And that would just be a look into how we receive these non-English authored texts now in English, and some of the crimes I would say are being committed in English translation. So thank you for watching this one. I will continue the stream. I'm going to end here so I can clip this episode, but I'm going to relaunch right after. So stay tuned for just a minute.